Let's see if the mechanic can even start the engines. What will happen next? The pilot laughed as she climbed into the cockpit they gave her just to mock her. No helmet that fit, no comms, just silence. They thought it would be funny until the Griffin lifted off smooth, steady, perfect, until she broke the flight record without breaking a sweat, and the crowd on the tarmac stopped laughing. 13 minutes later, a general stepped out of a black SUV and said 6 words that changed the meaning of her flight forever. Before we dive in, where are you listening from right now? What's your story? Drop it in the comments. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. At 4:50 a.m., the maintenance hangar at Redstone Air Base was already alive with a low hum of pre-dawn activity. The overhead lights buzzed, tools clicked against metal, and boots echoed off concrete that had seen 50 years of military precision. Ella Lehner West walked in exactly as she did every morning, silent, steady, and invisible. Her coveralls were always clean, but worn, her auburn hair pulled back tight into a regulation bun that hadn't changed in 8 years, and her green eyes never met anyone's. Too long, not because she was timid, but because she didn't want to be remembered. She moved with a calm competence that made younger techs glance twice, but say nothing. Most assumed she'd been in maintenance for years, the kind of lifer who kept her head down and knew every bolt of every bird in the fleet. What they didn't know was that Ella Lehner West wasn't her real name. 8 years ago, she'd worn a different name on her flight suit: Captain Ella Lehner Hawthorne, Squadron Leader, F-22 pilot. Decorated in 3 campaigns before her 32nd birthday, and then just like that, erased. The mission had been routine: a night patrol during Operation Desert Shield, 6 aircraft, clear skies, no warning. But someone had sold their coordinates, someone had sent them into a kill box. 4 pilots died that night, and the only one who returned was Ella Lehner. By the time the smoke cleared, the betrayal had been buried, the blame had been placed. Falsified logs, doctored mission briefings, and false testimony pointed the finger squarely at her. Her commanding officer, Colonel Warren Blake, vanished into early retirement, and Ella Lehner Hawthorne vanished into shame. She changed her name, took a discharge, and disappeared into the one place nobody would look for a disgraced pilot: the back corner of a maintenance hangar. Her quarters were a shipping container tucked behind the fuel depot, no number on the door, just a padlock and the faint smell of oil inside. Beneath the cot was a small metal box she never opened in daylight. It held 3 things: a photo of her standing beside an F-22 smiling like someone who still believed in justice, a tarnished badge with 4 stars, and a letter from Lieutenant Marco Torres written hours before his final flight, a note she had memorized but still read often because it reminded her who she really was. Every morning before the base woke, she ran the perimeter alone, 5 miles in the dark, 5 miles to remember, 5 miles to survive, and then she worked engines, rotors, hydraulics. Each aircraft she touched became a small act of healing, close enough to flight to remember what it felt like, but never close enough to leave the ground. She didn't seek friendship, and most left her alone, except for Amanda Rodriguez, a 23-year-old maintenance trainee who had started asking quiet questions. Amanda was sharp, too sharp, maybe. She'd once watched Eleanor troubleshoot a power distribution issue on a Falcon jet in under 5 minutes, something that had stumped 2 senior engineers for a week. You ever fly one of these? Amanda had asked casually. Eleanor had only smiled. Only in my dreams. But not everyone was so respectful. Captain Jake Callahan made sure of that. 29 years old, Harvard ring, father in Congress, swagger in his walk. He was the face of modern military flight, polished, confident, and untouchable. He treated the maintenance crew like furniture, and he made no effort to hide his contempt for anyone who wasn't wearing wings. Grease monkeys, he called them, ground rats, part of the decor. But with Ella Lehner, his mockery turned personal. Still pretending to be useful, West, he said once, loud enough for half the hangar to hear, or just looking for a pilot to impress. She never responded, she just kept working. But Amanda heard, so did others, and over time, the hangar learned that Eleanor West wasn't someone you mock twice. Then came the announcement: Desert Storm 3, the biggest training exercise Redstone had hosted in 5 years, 5 days, 5 squadrons, and 1 new aircraft, the Griffin HX-9. A hybrid rotor jet designed for close combat and long-range support. Top pilots from across the country were flying in. Media coverage, command evaluations, promotion boards watching everything, and the Griffin HX-9 maintenance detail desperately understaffed. Senior Master Sergeant Ron Maddox approached Eleanor at her station one morning, clipboard in hand, voice low but serious. West, we're moving you over to the Griffin crew, he said, effective immediately. She looked up from the engine housing she was calibrating. Understood, Sergeant. You familiar with the specs? I've read the manuals. He gave her a long look. Most techs needed months to even begin grasping the Griffin systems, but Eleanor just nodded and returned to her work. What Maddox didn't know, what nobody knew, was that she had been studying the Griffin for 3 years, every schematic, every test flight report, every line of code in its avionics, because deep down she still believed that someday she might get one more chance, one more moment to touch the sky, even if it was just from the ground, as she Packed up her tools, Amanda jogged over, breathless from the other end of the hangar. "You're going on the Griffin team?" she asked. Ella Laner nodded. "Looks that way." Amanda hesitated. "That's kind of close to flight ops, you okay with that?" Ella Laner's eyes drifted to the open sky beyond the hangar doors, then she turned back, her voice quiet. "But sure, I'm exactly where I need to be." What none of them knew, not yet, was that Desert Storm 3 wouldn't just test aircraft or pilots, it would test integrity, reveal truth, and drag a ghost out of the shadows whether she was ready or not, because Ella Laner West had hidden for 8 long years. But history has a way of circling back. Some names refuse to stay forgotten. Ella Laner's first morning with the Griffin HX-9 crew began inside a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and engine grease. Pilots filled the front rows, maintenance tech stood against the back wall. No one looked twice at the woman with the clipboard except one. Captain Jake Callahan leaned back in his chair, boots propped casually on the edge of the table. He scanned the room, smirk in place, voice loud enough to carry. "Let's give a warm welcome to the wrench turners joining us this week, especially West, who I here reads the manuals for fun." Laughter followed, not cruel, exactly, just dismissive, the kind that slides in under the skin and stays there. Eleanor said nothing, she kept her eyes down, her pen still, but Amanda, 2 seats over, caught the faint tightening of her jaw. Later that day, in the hangar, Amanda cornered her by the fuel lines. "You going to let him talk to you like that?" Ella Laner didn't even blink. "Doesn't matter what he says." "It does," Amanda insisted, voice rising slightly. "You don't deserve that." Ella Laner finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Deserve doesn't always enter into it." Amanda hesitated, then lowered her voice. "People here, they notice the way you work, the way you move in the cockpit. You're not just another tech." Ella Laner gave a quiet smile. "And yet, here I am." That night back in her container, Ella Laner sat on the edge of her cot. The air smelled faintly of fuel and winter. Outside, the wind howled over the empty tarmac. She reached under the bed and pulled out the metal box. The lid creaked as it opened, revealing the same 3 items she had touched every night for years: the photo, the badge, and the letter. She unfolded it gently, her fingers trembling just enough to betray what she always tried to hide. "Captain," the letter began, "whatever happens out there, I want you to know we trust you completely. You're the best pilot any of us have ever flown with. See you on the other side." It was signed, simply de Torres. Eleanor closed her eyes, pressing the paper to her chest. 4 names, 4 friends, for funerals she never got to attend. The injustice didn't burn the same way anymore. It ached like old scar tissue pulled tight in the cold. The next morning brought new tension. Major Jennifer Cross, one of the few women to ever fly combat rotors at that level, arrived at the flight line early. She had noticed Ella Laner from the first briefing, not because she stood out, but because she didn't. Cross had learned to spot the difference between someone trying to look invisible and someone who already was. She watched Ella Laner complete a diagnostic on the Griffin's flight stabilizers with movements that were too practiced, too precise. Most maintenance staff had to double-check the schematics. Ella Laner worked from memory. That afternoon, Cross approached her casually near the fuel pumps. "You seem comfortable with these birds," she said. Eleanor didn't pause. "I've studied them." Cross raised an eyebrow. "Studied or flown?" Eleanor glanced up, just for a second, then she looked away. "Studied." Cross smiled faintly. She didn't press, but she started watching more closely. 2 days later, during a midweek briefing, disaster hit. 3 backup pilots were pulled from the schedule, all victims of food poisoning. After lunch at the base canteen, Colonel Seth Morgan, the base commander, looked like a man watching his career teeter on the edge. "This is a disaster," he muttered to his staff. 3 pilot slots open before the final demonstration, the Pentagon sending observers. "If this exercise fails," Callahan leaned forward, smile already forming, "I might have a solution." Cross tensed in her seat. Amanda, standing near the rear equipment rack, held her breath. Callahan turned to Colonel Morgan. "Let's give the maintenance crew a taste of flight ops. It'll boost morale, be educational." Morgan frowned. "What exactly do you mean?" Callahan's grin widened. "Let one of them sit in the Griffin during an engine startup, show them what the real work looks like, and then," he said it, "West should do it. She's been poking around long enough." Silence followed. Cross's eyes narrowed. Amanda looked like she wanted to throw something. Ella Laner said nothing. Colonel Morgan rubbed his temple. "Only if she signs every waiver we've got." Callahan waved it off. "Standard safety protocol, 5 minutes. What could go wrong?" "What indeed?" After the meeting, Amanda caught up with Ella Laner by the lockers. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Ella Laner shrugged. "I've done harder things." Amanda stepped in front of her. "He's setting you up." "I know, so why do it?" Ella Laner looked past her toward the distant airfield. "Because someone will be watching." Cross found her alone in the prep bay, reviewing the Griffin's checklist with a quiet focus that felt out of place. "You ready for your big debut?" Cross asked. Ella Laner didn't look up. "It's not a debut, it's a setup." Cross folded her arms. "You could say no." Ella Laner paused. "I've been saying no for 8 years. Maybe it's time I stop." Cross didn't respond, but she stayed nearby. When Ella Laner walked onto the tarmac, the crowd was already forming. Word had spread like wildfire. Pilots, crew, even officers from other wings had shown up. most with phones ready to record. The flight suit they gave her was ill-fitting, the helmet was scratched and missing comms, a silence signal that this was never meant to be serious. As Callahan stood beside the aircraft, all charm and cruelty. Try not to press the red button, West, that one makes the wings fall off. Scattered laughter. Ella Laner climbed into the cockpit without a word. Inside, the Griffin felt familiar. The seat cradled her like it remembered. Her fingers found switches without hesitation. She took a breath and then the systems came alive. The power cycle activated in perfect sequence. The HUD lit up. The engines purred, not coughed, into readiness. In the crowd, Cross narrowed her eyes. Amanda's mouth dropped open. Callahan's smile froze. Eleanor's hands moved with calm, practiced precision. One system after another, she ran the pre-flight checks with surgical flow. It wasn't just impressive, it was impossible. From the far end of the line, someone whispered, "She's not faking it." Ella Laner adjusted the throttle. The Griffin responded like an extension of her thoughts. Every pilot watching knew what they were seeing. This wasn't someone pretending, this was someone who had lived in this seat, and in that moment, the mask began to slip. Not Ella Laner's. The Griffin's rotors whirred to full life as Ella Laner sat motionless in the cockpit. Below her, a crowd gathered, still expecting the punchline to land, still believing this was a joke, a spectacle, a technician pretending to be a pilot. But when she pushed the throttle forward and lifted the Griffin off the ground, no one was laughing anymore. The aircraft rose smoothly, effortlessly, hovering for a moment like a bird testing the wind, and then, with a tilt of her hand, it surged forward into the open sky. Can you believe this turn of events? Amanda felt her breath catch. She'd expected hesitation, some clumsy fumble. Instead, she watched something close to art. Major Cross stood near the runway edge, arms folded, expression unreadable, but her eyes tracked every movement with quiet intensity. Callahan, meanwhile, had gone pale, his usual smirk replaced by the wide-eyed look of a man realizing he just handed a live grenade to the wrong person. Up in the air, Ella Laner angled into the first turn of the simulation. It was a search and rescue demo. Locate a down pilot, avoid simulated threats, return to base. No weapons, just maneuvering, precision and tactical logic. The current record, 31 minutes, held by Callahan himself. Eleanor hit the outer perimeter in two. Inside the control center, technicians stared at their monitors in silence. "Who's flying X-Ray 7? Someone whispered. A junior officer checked the manifest, confused. That's a maintenance tech." The lead controller leaned forward, staring at the telemetry. "Maintenance doesn't fly like that." Ella Laner dipped into the canyon terrain following. At barely 200 feet, the Griffin skimmed rock walls and twisted through sharp ravines, avoiding simulated missile locks like she had lived through real ones. Her hands moved without hesitation, throttle, rudder, angle of attack, every motion instinctive, every response precise. She wasn't fighting the aircraft, she was part of it. "Sweet Jesus," Cross muttered, watching the display screen. "She's not just flying, she's executing." Back on the tarmac, Callahan paced like a man waiting for the world to end. He turned to Colonel Morgan. "We need to shut this down. She's unqualified, she's going to crash." Morgan didn't move. He was too focused on the footage streaming in from the command center, too focused on what he was witnessing. At the extraction point, Ella Laner located the simulated beacon in just under 3 minutes. Her entry into the recovery zone was clean, efficient, even elegant. While most pilots hovered clumsily during retrieval, she held position with micrometric adjustments, balancing torque, pitch, and rotor angle like she was performing surgery. The simulated enemy fire began. Automated systems targeted her approach vector, but Eleanor, she danced. Her hover shifted inches at a time, avoiding every predicted strike zone with uncanny precision. Cross whispered almost reverently, "She knows the algorithms, she's flying inside the program." Amanda stood at the edge of the crowd, eyes wide. It was the first time she truly saw Eleanor, not as a technician or a ghost, but as a pilot, as someone born to fly. Eleanor made the return trip in record time, full throttle, minimal drag, 23 minutes from takeoff to landing. When the Griffin skids touched down with a whisper, dead center on the pad, the crowd didn't cheer, they couldn't, they were too stunned. The silence was louder than any applause. Ella Laner climbed down slowly, helmet in hand, sweat at her brow. The ill-fitting flight suit hung loose on her frame, but she stood tall, not triumphant, not proud, simply resolved. Amanda watched her walk, a path cutting clean through the parting crowd. Then the sirens, 3 black SUVs roared down the flight line, tires screeching as they came to a stop. Doors swung open, uniformed military police stepped out first, and then from the lead vehicle, General Raymond Holt, 3 stars on each shoulder, face weathered by war and time. He scanned the crowd once, then his eyes landed on her. He stepped forward and with a voice like gravel wrapped in steel, he called out, "Captain Eleanor Hawthorne." Front and center, the crowd rippled, mouths dropped open. Callahan swayed on his feet. Morgan looked like he'd been punched. Ella Laner froze, then slowly she turned. She walked forward, eyes steady, and when she stopped, she stood at attention. 8 years melted away in the span of a breath. Her salute was perfect. General Holt returned it, then he turned toward the gathered base. "This woman," he said, voice rising, was once the youngest squadron leader in the United States Air Force, decorated for valor, trusted by her team, respected by her superiors. Until the day she was betrayed by a coward in uniform. Holt pulled an envelope from his jacket, presidential seal, red wax, gold edge. Captain Hawthorne was falsely accused, court-martialed on fabricated evidence, silenced, discarded. She chose silence, not because she lacked truth, but because her dignity would not let her beg. The air felt electric, no one moved, phone still recorded, but hands were trembling. Holt stepped closer, holding out the envelope. On behalf of the United States Air Force, I offer the full restoration of your rank, immediate promotion to major, back pay, choice of command, full honors reinstated. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. So did several others, but Ella Laner, she didn't reach for the envelope. She looked at it, then at the aircraft behind her, then at Holt, and finally she shook her head. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. I appreciate the offer, sir, she said quietly, but I don't need it. Holt's brow furrowed. You've earned this. I know. Then why walk away? Eleanor exhaled. For 8 years, I lost everything except the truth. Today, the truth stood up on its own. She turned to Callahan, still pale, still frozen. With quiet hands, she folded the borrowed flight suit and placed it gently beside his boots. You'll need it more than I will. Then she faced the cameras. For anyone who's ever been told they don't belong, she said, voice steady, remember, this skill doesn't come with rank, respect isn't given by position, and the sky belongs to everyone brave. Enough to rise. She walked off the tarmac as the crowd parted again, not for a hero, not for a spectacle, but for a woman who had nothing left to prove. Eleanor Hawthorne didn't ask for vindication, she became it. The flight suit lay folded on the wing of the Griffin, still warm from Ella Laner's flight. Callahan stood a few feet away, motionless, as if the air had turned solid around him. She looked at him one last time, her voice calm. You'll need it more than I will. Then she turned and walked away. Boots echoing on the tarmac, no medal, no speech, no dramatic salute, just quiet, just grace. Amanda stood among the crowd, unable to move. Her throat was tight, her heart thudding in her chest. Later that night, after the commotion faded, Amanda returned to the container behind the fuel depot. Eleanor's quarters. The door had been left unlocked. Inside, everything was gone except for one thing, a single envelope left on the desk. Amanda picked it up with trembling hands. Her name was written on the front. She opened it carefully, unfolding the letter inside. The paper smelled faintly of oil and cedar. The handwriting was steady, precise. For the next woman who faces impossible odds, your worth isn't determined by their recognition. Fly your own course. Amanda sat on the cot for a long time, staring at the words. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming sense that she had witnessed something sacred. By morning, the video had gone viral. Footage of the Griffin flight, the confrontation on the runway, the general's salute, and Eleanor's refusal. It was on every screen in America. By noon, news anchors called her the ghost pilot. Military blogs lit up with speculation. Flight mice debated tactics. She'd used Midair that weren't in any manual, but no one could explain the moment that hit the hardest, the way she walked away from the offer everyone thought she wanted, because deep down we all knew that kind of quiet dignity can't be taught. The impact was immediate. Captain Jake Callahan resigned in disgrace 3 days later. The Air Force accepted his resignation, but the Pentagon opened a separate inquiry. His family, once vocal supporters, released a brief statement. We do not condone his behavior. He disappeared from public life. Last anyone heard, he was selling cars in Nevada. Colonel Morgan wasn't as lucky. An internal investigation found a long pattern of toxic command climate under his leadership. Ignored complaints, buried reports, retaliation swept under the rug. He was relieved of duty, pending court-martial. His fall became a cautionary tale in officer training across every branch, but the ripple spread farther than just Redstone. Within a month, the Senate Committee on Armed Services convened emergency hearings. The topic, systemic failures in military justice. General Raymond Holt testified under oath. So did Amanda, so did others who'd worked beside Eleanor without ever knowing who she truly was. The conclusion was swift. The system needed reform, and change had to start with protecting those brave enough to tell the truth. General Holt didn't wait for legislation. He used his own retirement fund to launch the Hawthorne Foundation, named in honor of the woman he failed to protect. The foundation's mission was simple: to defend and support service members who faced retaliation for speaking up, to ensure what happened to Ella Laner never happened again. By the end of the year, they had offices in 6 states. 6 months after that final flight, Montana's skies opened to something new. A converted airfield near Helena became the home of the Hawthorne Aviation Academy. It wasn't fancy, no marble walls, no government grants, but it had hangars, runways, classrooms, and it had Ella Laner. She didn't advertise, she didn't do interviews, but word spread, and people came. Former soldiers, discharged mechanics, women told they'd never make it through flight school, veterans with PTSD looking for peace, they all came. Amanda moved there, too. She became the Academy's chief maintenance instructor, teaching others what Eleanor once taught her without saying a word, that competence has its own quiet strength. Eleanor taught flight again, not in combat jets or simulators, but in prop planes and trainers. One of her students, Carlos Vega, was a former Army mechanic. He'd been rejected from 3 civilian flight programs for lacking the proper foundation, but Eleanor saw something different. One cold morning, as frost clung to the grass near the runway, she stood beside him at the edge of the tarmac. "You ready for your solo flight?" she asked. Carlos swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know where to prove it." She nodded. "Then let's go." They moved toward the aircraft, side by side, two people who had once been told no, now building yes, one takeoff at a time. That afternoon, Amanda watched from the hangar as Carlos lifted into the air. A little shaky at first, but steadying with each passing second. Eleanor stood nearby, hands in her jacket pockets, face calm. Amanda asked, "Do you ever think about going back to command, to the Air Force?" Eleanor didn't answer at first. Her eyes followed Carlos's plane as it climbed against the pale blue sky. Then she spoke softly. "Success doesn't come from getting back what you lost, it comes from choosing what to let go so you can fly higher." Amanda didn't reply. She didn't have to, because she knew the woman who once wore a squadron badge and hid in the shadows was now the one teaching others to rise. Eleanor Hawthorne had walked away from rank, from revenge, from redemption wrapped in uniform. But what she created instead was something bigger than vindication. She created a place where truth didn't need permission, where respect was earned, not granted, and where flight wasn't about rank, but about rising. The ghost in the hangar was gone. What remained was a teacher, a guide, and a legacy written in every takeoff that followed. Above them, the sky stretched wide and waiting, and Eleanor, she was already moving toward the next runway. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places, not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.